Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everybody, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Harvest is over, but news from the agricultural world keeps rolling out. Lots to get to today. We'll begin by checking the highlights from the USDA's December WASDE report. U.S. corn ending stocks were estimated at 1.78 billion bushels, up from 1.73 billion last month. Exports remain at 2.45 billion bushels. For U.S. wheat ending stocks, there was an increase of 25 million bushels to 974 million. U.S. soybean ending stocks and exports were unchanged. Final estimates for U.S. corn and soybean production will come out in next month's report. Dr. Scott Brown is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the University of Missouri's College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources. And we always love to hear what he has to say with what's going on in agriculture. Scott, thanks for being here with us.
You bet, Troy.
So Scott, as we start off, the G20 summit wrapped up earlier this month, and a big story we've been following is the meetings with the U.S. and China and how that'll impact trade. Could you catch us up to date on what happened at the summit and where the two countries currently stand?
Well, we certainly see that we're getting negotiations occurring here between the United States and China coming out of that G20 meeting. A lot of interest in maybe the Chinese taking more agricultural products as we move into early 2019. I think we're still really early in that process. At least at this point, I think we've postponed any additional tariffs occurring between the two countries, likely until we get beyond that March 1st deadline as we seek to find a solution to de-escalate what's been going on here in 2018.
So would you think it's still too early to say how that's going to impact the markets come next year?
I think it is pretty early in the process to understand what the true effect will be on markets. Now, I will say this, if we get a successful conclusion and can talk about reduced tariffs on things like soybeans and pork products going to China, it's nothing but a win for U.S. agriculture, and I'd expect both of those markets to respond positively to any news there. I think we're just too early in the process to really know how quickly we de-escalate some of the tariffs that we've seen come into place in 2018.
And it looks like there was some progress on the 2018 Farm Bill earlier this week. What are the main takeaways that we need to know here?
Yeah, so number one, it looks like we might be getting a lot closer for producers to have certainty for the next 5 years in terms of another Farm Bill. In terms of what that means for producers, again, I think more certainty in terms of what happens moving forward for crop producers, knowing crop insurance is in place. Programs like ARC and PLC, although maybe a little different flavor under this Farm Bill, will remain moving forward for the next 5 years. I think the dairy industry is going to be very interested to watch what came out of the Farm Bill for them, where we had the old margin protection program that had upper coverage of $8 in terms of margin. We now talk about another expansion of $1.50 to $9.50 coverage at much cheaper premiums. So I think we have strengthened that safety net for dairy producers here in the U.S.
So you mentioned the dairy market. Of course, that'll be a group that's going to benefit. Do you think we're going to see any optimism in the dairy industry for 2019 as a result of the Farm Bill or otherwise?
I certainly think the suite of risk management tools, whether you talk the new dairy RP program that we have in place today or the Farm Bill that was passed, I think both of those provide stronger safety nets, especially for smaller producers moving forward. In terms of where we go for market prices into 2019, I think we're still going to talk about some expansion in overall milk supplies in the United States in 2019. Maybe we'll get a reduction in dairy cow numbers continuing into 2019, but overall supply growth still growing. That means we either got to get stronger trade or stronger domestic use, both of which have been tough for the dairy industry the past couple of years. I guess at this point, I say, well, I think we will get higher milk prices in 2019, somewhere around 75 cents a hundred, so not a large increase from what's going to be an annual average in 2018 of about $16.20, but certainly a move in the right direction. I guess the caveat here is these dairy markets move pretty quickly with small changes in demand or supply. We could certainly see that again unfold in 2019 and perhaps some stronger prices than where I see markets right now.
And as far as meat goes, as we head into 2019, you think it's safe to say that we'll see livestock production continue to grow too?
Troy, I think that's the one thing we know with certainty as we look in 2019. You know, if we look at red meat and poultry supplies for 2019, I'd expect we're going to be up roughly another 3 billion pounds in the United States when you account for beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. So I want to make sure that livestock producers remember that's the biggest issue we're going to continue to watch in 2019 is that we are going to have expanding supplies, and it's all going to come down to the demand side to see where prices balance out as we move into 2019.
So what's the top story that you're keeping your eye on as we head into the new year?
I guess there's two issues that I really want to pay attention to for 2019. Number one, African swine fever and the effects in China in terms of pork production. If we continue to see ASF expand tremendously in 2019, that could be a real positive for U.S. pork markets. So we'll have to keep our eye on that one. And I guess the second one for me is just what happens to the U.S. economic growth going into 2019. A few signs things are starting to slow down there, I guess, and just given the sheer amount of meat and dairy products we're going to bring to the marketplace in 2019, we need consumers with more money in their pockets if we're going to try to keep prices at reasonable level for producers.
And as we wrap up here, last question, any other advice that you have for producers into the year ahead?
I certainly think risk management is going to play a key role for them again in 2019. You know, we've gotten used to very cheap feed prices. If we talk about dry weather, getting out to next spring or summer, being able to protect what likely would be an increase in feed costs, I think all of that's going to be critical. So making sure they have good risk management plans in place and execute those in 2019 when the opportunity arises is going to be important for their long-term economic viability.
All right, Dr. Scott Brown, great talking with you today. We definitely appreciate it.
Hey, you bet, Troy, anytime.
Next week, we'll be joined by Dr. Chad Hart, an agricultural economist from Iowa State University. He'll give his take on the latest ag happenings. So if you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. When you're out there looking at your field, it's easy to focus on the crops and forget that soil matters more than we even realize. Made up of air, water, minerals, and organic material, it's one of the most important natural resources on Earth. Dr. Andrea Basche is an assistant professor in UNL's Department of Agronomy and Horticulture and has been studying soil and the climate's impact on it for years. She joined me on the show to give some background on her work, and she even brought a really cool demonstration too.
So I have a background both in agronomy and climate science, and the research I've done has really focused on understanding crop and soil management strategies to help reduce climate risks. And cover crops has been one thing that I've studied a lot as a climate risk reduction tool. As I started to study more about climate change impacts on agriculture and food production, I got very interested in the soil and seeing that as an adaptation solution. And we hear a lot about people who are thinking about, increased food demand over the next upcoming decades with, increased population. But I really think a lot about the soil and what's our soil resource going to look like by 2050. And that's actually what I'm really excited to show on the show today, that on a positive note, the way we manage our soil can make a big difference on our outcomes.
So yeah, kind of remind our viewers why soil health is so important.
Right, so if you think about soil health like human health, I mean, if we don't have our own health, then what do we have, right? So typically when we think about soil health, that term tends to take into account the physical, biological, and chemical properties of the soil. And the biological properties, really the living organisms in the soil, so the microbes, the earthworms, how alive is the soil, that's the biology. The chemistry being, how well is your soil cycling nutrients like nitrogen or phosphorus. The physical aspects of the soil being things like, how well does the soil structure allow plant roots to grow, how much water can be stored. So if you can say yes to all of those questions, then that really is an indicator that you have healthy soil. And what that means for producers is that you're going to have a more productive soil in time that's better for your bottom line, and it also protects your soil resource into the future.
So we've talked about why soil health is so important, and we actually have a demonstration here. What are we looking at?
So what I hope the demonstration will illustrate is just a few different ways that we manage soil and what those outcomes are. And in particular, this is going to demonstrate the infiltration rate of the soil, which means the rate at which water enters the soil, which is so important when we think about getting more of these heavy rain event days. And it's something I've studied. It's something I've also heard a lot of farmers brag about or talk about, in particular some of the cover crop farmers that I know. They love to tell these stories about that day that there was a 5-inch rain event and their soil just soaked up all the rain, but their neighbors had, you know, water standing on their field for days after. So it's a really important aspect of how our soil functions. And so what we have here is soil from the Rogers Memorial Farm, which is a University of Nebraska research station. It's located about 10 miles east of Lincoln. And this soil is from a tillage experiment that's been going on since 1981. It's been managed by Paul Yassa in Extension. And so what we have here is a pretty simple setup. So we've got some beakers that we drilled some holes in the bottom of. We've got some containers to collect water, and we've got some vessels to simulate rainfall over our soil surface. And actually this amount of water is meant to represent about a ½ an inch of rain over this surface area. So the 3 soils that we have here, again, are all from Rogers Memorial Farm. The first one here is soil that has been from that tillage experiment that's been conventionally tilled or tilled with a moldboard plow in the fall and disked twice in the spring since 1981. So managed that way for 38 years. Nice. This soil in the middle is a no-till soil, so has not been disturbed at all in those 38 years. These are corn, soybean, crop rotations, dry land experiment. And then the third soil is actually from a grassed area, unfarmed, on the research station, where we just dug up some soil to try to demonstrate what's the difference when you have permanent roots in the soil as well.
So just some natural grass.
Yeah, some natural grass. Yeah, and so it's all the same soil type. It's a silty clay loam soil. All right, so you ready to help me, Troy?
All right,
help make it rain?
Let's do it.
Okay, so what we're going to be looking for is how quickly the water is moving through the soil. So, and really, the quicker that the water gets into the containers, the better that would be for water moving through the soil profile for where we'd want plant roots to access it versus running off and taking soil and nutrients with it.
Okay, so count of 3.
1, 2, 3. So you can see in the grassed and no-till soil that water's moving quite quickly through the profile. So you can see a lot of water coming out of the bottom here.
Oh yeah.
But you can also see in the conventionally tilled soil that there's less water coming out. It's moving more slowly.
Yeah, and it's pooling up too.
Right, and you have the water collecting at the top of the beaker.
Really pooling up top.
Right, so in my own research, what I found is that cover crops, so again, continuous roots in the soil, can significantly increase infiltration rates, and they can also significantly increase the water that's stored in the soil. And actually, what Paul Yassa's long-term tillage experiment has found is that the no-till plots actually yield the highest consistently. This is right now a corn-soybean crop rotation.
And what are some things that producers can do in addition to cover crops to get healthy soil?
Right, so I would like to remind producers more about the principles of good soil management and soil health rather than just specific practices, right? So some of those principles that can be transferred to practices that might work in one area versus another are trying to minimize disturbance as much as possible, trying to use a diversity of crops and possibly integrating livestock, and also keeping living roots in the soil, so things like cover crops, perennial crops, et cetera. So thinking about those principles of good soil management.
So you've gone on record saying that a lot of attention is given to air quality, water quality, not so much or not as much with soil. So what is it that you'd like the public and farmers to be aware of?
Sure. I just think that point exactly, that we never hear about the imperative of soil, right? Soil is just the thin living skin of the earth. It's, you know, not a readily renewable resource, and the need to protect it is really vital. And so just the fact that we don't hear about it enough, in my opinion, I think. So I would say for producers, don't be afraid to remind people that you are stewards of the soil, and for the general public, being more cognizant of the fact that we all depend on soil, to eat 3 times a day.
Definitely. And we always hear stories about how climate change is impacting natural resources. How does that play out as far as soil goes?
Right. So one of the major climate impacts we are already experiencing and can continue to experience in this area is increased rainfall variability, right? So national estimates have found that for regions like the Northern Great Plains, Midwest, Northeast, that heavy rain events have increased over 30% relative to the earlier part of the 20th century. And so with those heavy rain events, you have a chance for increased soil erosion, you have the chance for increased soil degradation, which can lead to lower productivity. So those are 2 major impacts. And when you think about the geologic time it takes to form soil, and we can appreciate that things like rainfall contribute actually to soil formation, they can also contribute to the degradation of soil. But estimates have found that for soil to form, and again, that's really just the breakdown of rock or movement of materials that become soil, that can happen at a rate of about 0.5 ton per acre per year. But when we think about some of the rain events we've had this year, there was actually a few days of rain in eastern Nebraska in early September where we got 6 inches of rain in a few days, and estimates of soil erosion loss for some parts of eastern Nebraska were 3 tons per acre. So if you think about 0.5 ton per acre per year formation, 3 tons of loss in just a few days, it's going to take years to form what we lost in just a few days. So we can lose soil that takes a long time to form in just a short amount of time. So some kind of sobering facts around the need for soil conservation with rainfall variability. But the good news is that we can see that the way we manage soil really does make a difference on outcomes from heavy rain events. And actually Nebraska leads the Corn Belt in the number of acres of no-till. That's estimated to be 50% of our cropped acres. Okay. A little bit less for cover crops. It's just about 2% of cropped acres. Those are numbers from the most recent ag census. We'll have some new data from that out in the spring, but hopefully an increase in some of those things. But we can impact the future and what the growing rainfall variability means for our soil resource.
Thanks again to Andrea for coming on the show and helping to bring attention to an important topic. Moving on now, and with harvest being complete, it's a good time to catch a break and begin planning for next season. And researchers behind the scenes are already crunching numbers to help give you an idea of the money you'll be putting down. Extension educator Glennis McClure helped contribute to the 2019 crop budget report. She joined me in the studio to explain what the report is and the research that goes into it.
Well, the Nebraska crop budgets are done annually, and they're based on cropping practice norms throughout Nebraska. And in 2019, we've done 78 budgets on 15 different crops. And we do those in a spreadsheet format. And so it allows producers to be able to go in and modify those and sort of make them their own if they choose to do that. And the results of those is we come up with a total production cost and a cash cost per unit. And that per unit cost is based on a total of all costs divided by the yields in each of the crops. The crop budgets include cost estimates only and do not provide net return or profitability estimates.
And what are the ways that farmers and producers will find this information useful?
Well, there's really a lot of details and a wealth of knowledge and experience that go into these crop budgets. Bob Klein, who's at the North Platte Extension Center, and a team of university specialists put together information on the input costs and the application rates based on the yields. And really, I think farmers can find that these are good guidelines, and if they're doing some of their own cost projections, they can also do some comparisons, I think, with what their information is and what our information provides in the crop budgets.
So what are some of the biggest budget changes from 2018 to 2019 that producers need to be concerned with?
Well, one of the changes that were made in the budgets this year is that we had an actual yield and a yield goal before in those budgets. This year we went to just doing one yield goal. So it'll make it easier to do some comparisons moving forward. So it's a little difficult to look back and make some comparisons because of that adjustment. Also, of course, we adjusted the real estate investment rate downward by 1%. Last year it was at 4%. This year we used a 3% figure. As well as the real estate taxes, they've crept up. We did make an adjustment upward on real estate taxes, but on the other hand, we decreased real estate values, and that was based on the Nebraska Real Estate Report. We used those figures, as we look to doing the budgets.
And where are we seeing the largest increase in costs?
I think with the fuel prices as they were increasing, a month or two ago, and these are just recent adjustments, and I guess throughout this year they have been increasing. We increased the diesel cost from $2.45 per gallon a year ago to $2.49 in this year's budgets. But what it did do with those fuel price increases is we noticed an increase of about 20% in nitrogen and about 11% increase in phosphorus. So of course those crops that use those inputs are going to see some material input cost increases.
Anything of note with decreasing costs?
Well, other than the land value and the investment rate adjustments that we made, there really wasn't a lot of cost adjustments downward that we included in the budgets for this year.
Okay, so and as one of the researchers with this, what were some findings that you found to be especially interesting or surprising?
Well, we've noticed some cost increases, especially as I mentioned in the materials and services section, but of course there have been a few cost decreases. As I've glanced through the comparisons from the 2018 to 2019, I see a slight overall increase in costs with some exceptions. While we can't compare, we have to be careful about comparing the budgets from year to year as apples to apples. Sure. But like looking at a dryland corn budget in a corn-soybean rotation with a 100-bushel yield goal, we see a total cost per bushel estimate of 9 cents less. And the total cost noted in the budget overall is $4.10 for 2019. On a no-till pivot irrigated soybean example with a 70-bushel yield goal, we saw a total cost per bushel calculated at $7.76 per bushel for 2019 compared to $7.65 a year ago. So that's 11 cents difference in a decrease in that particular budget. So you'll see some that are higher and some that are lower.
We've posted a link to the report Glennis was talking about on the Market Journal Facebook page. You can also head over to cropwatch.unl.edu/budgets. Along with this year's report, you'll have the option to check out budgets from past years. Nebraska has enjoyed an increase in pulse crop production over the last few years. That's thanks in large part to the growth in yellow field pea acres across the state. In 2017, the combined acreage of field peas, lentils, and chickpeas in Nebraska increased to about 80,000 acres. As the state's pulse crop industry grows, Nebraska Extension Educator Strahenia Stepanovich notes a pulse crop checkoff could be one way to keep the industry moving forward. Stepanovich recently sent a survey to growers asking whether or not the state should create a Nebraska pulse crop checkoff. You can learn more in the December Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, seems like we've had some pretty calm conditions this week. Temperatures in many spots back in line with where they should be for this time of year. So can we expect this to continue?
Well, Troy, you are correct. We've had some very nice weather, and it looks like that will continue this weekend and possibly even all the way through Christmas, as most of the models are hinting at much above normal temperatures to dominate pretty much the center of the country. And it does not appear at this point in time the models are agreeing that we will have a white Christmas. It looks like it is going to be a brown Christmas across the vast majority of Nebraska. We take this warmer weather. It's been a very long, cool fall period with a lot of inclement weather, so it's nice to start to see a break as we move into the first part of the winter. And by all consensus in terms of what we're seeing in terms of equatorial Pacific, it looks like this event will last, this El Nino will last for the next few months, and I expect that the trends that we are starting to see develop will continue on for a vast majority of the winter. So as we look at today, we have this upper air low that is moving across the northern plains. Most of the moisture will be right across the Canadian and the U.S. border over toward the Great Lakes, as these surface lows to our south just don't have enough energy to lift the moisture far enough to interact with this system. Most of the energy will be robbed from the system moving up the eastern seaboard with the heavy precipitation. Then as we go into tomorrow, we start to see this ridge is building into our region, bringing much warmer conditions to much of the central plains. As high pressure dominates, we should easily see most locations returning into the 40s to possibly 50s to the southern part of the state, with an absence of precipitation. The only major moisture, the western and the eastern seaboards. The high pressure slips a little bit farther to the east on Monday. We start to see a little bit of a wave moving across the southern United States underneath this ridge. That will not be a problem for us, as this low pressure system does not have any feed of moisture coming into it to generate precipitation. All of it remains on the western United States coast. As we get into the day on Tuesday, we start to see the ridge trying to build in, but that piece of energy starts to move to the south of us across Texas. High pressure remains firmly controlled in the central plains. Once again, we stay well above normal in terms of temperatures and a lack of precipitation. We should easily be in the 40s to the low 50s. And then we start to see that energy move over top of that ridge, bringing in a little cooler air to the northern plains. And some of that will reach into northeast and east central Nebraska, as we know, on the day on Wednesday, with a slight cool down, probably 5 to 7 degrees. Much warmer conditions, probably 60s possible in the southwest part of the state. Here's a little bit of precipitation with that low that's slowly moving across the Gulf Coast states. And then we see that ridge starting to reestablish itself with a deep trough starting to form in the eastern United States. So it looks like we're going to stay dry here in the center part of the country, with most of the activity and cool conditions moving off to our east. And we see precipitation pretty much lacking across the country. As we go into the day on Friday, once again, we start to see another wave moving across the United States. But again, this does not dig southward and moves straight eastward. Keeps the precipitation to our north. Even though we see a surface low developing across portions of the Texas Panhandle, it's moving so quickly that it's not going to get the moisture up to us, and this really represents the last real good opportunity of significant snows or snowfall before Christmas. So the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday through Christmas Day shows above normal temperatures in terms of precipitation, bullseye below normal moisture right over Nebraska.
Thanks, Al. Now, before we go, I wanted to take a second to thank everyone who came by the Market Journal booth at last week's Nebraska Power Farming Show. It was a huge turnout. I met a lot of great folks, even gave away a lot of free stuff. We'll have more from the event on next week's show. That's going to do it for this week. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.